Today, he is called the idol of idols, although 15 years ago, he did not even have money for food. As a teenager, he left his mother's house, taking only a mattress with him, but soon bought her a new apartment and a car. He changed music without having a single hit at the time, and when they appeared, they stayed on the charts for years. How did he reinvent R&B and make millions fall in love with it all over again? How did he make Jim Carrey voice the afterlife? How did a Canadian of Ethiopian descent achieve the American dream? And finally, how did Abel Makonnen Tesfaye become the new king of pop? You are on the Encode Stories channel, and today we will tell you the story of one of the most successful musicians of our time, who everyone knows by the name of The Weeknd. In 1974, as a result of a military coup, the last emperor of Ethiopia, Haile Selassie, was deposed and then killed. Power passed into the hands of a group of rebels. Among them, there was a man who would very soon be called the Butcher from Ethiopia and Black Stalin. In reality, his name was Mengistu Mariam, and during his 10 years of reign, the country descended into chaos. There were no investigations in courts. People were killed simply on the streets for any suspicion of counter-revolutionary struggle. Thousands of people were looking for any way to escape the country. Among those who managed to escape from the mad dictator and the Red Terror were the parents of our today's hero, Samrawit Haile and Makonnen Tesfaye, as well as his grandmother. In the early 80s, they were very lucky to move to Canada, where they settled in the quiet neighborhood of Scarborough, in the east of Toronto. There, on February 16, 1990, Samrawit and Makonnen gave birth to their only son, Abel Makonnen Tesfaye. Abel's parents were never married and separated before the boy was 2 years old. Later, he will say the following about his father. I saw him vaguely when I was 6, and then again when I was 11 or 12, and he had a new family and kids. I'm sure he's a great guy. I never judged him. He wasn't abusive. He wasn't an alcoholic. He wasn't an asshole. He just wasn't there. His mother, Samrawit, raised her son along with her grandmother and devoted all her free time, that wasn't so much, to him. The woman worked hard, rarely had only one job, more often 2 or 3. She was a nurse, also worked in the food industry, managed to attend evening school, and devoted all her free time to her son. His grandmother, who did not speak English and communicated with him in her native Amharic language, also spent a lot of time with the boy. By the way, Abel mastered it earlier than English, so as a child, he liked to listen to the famous Ethiopian singer Starboy, who sang in Amharic. This language will later become the basis of his work, the reason why it sounds like that and not otherwise. You hear it in my music, Abel explains. Not literally, but the style and the vibrato and the way I sing is very unconventional. Grandma took little Abel to the Orthodox Ethiopian church, prepared traditional and high-calorie Ethiopian dishes, but they rarely talked about their family's past. Having experienced real horrors in their homeland, adults did not like to mention them, especially in the child's presence. I remember hearing some stories from my uncles, but I don't think my mom wanted to tell those stories. I don't think Ethiopians want their kids to feel like Ethiopia is a bad place. Abel grew up surrounded by love, but he was still a lonely child and dreamed of a brother so much that he sometimes even lied to other children that he had brothers, but they lived in other cities. By the age of 8, Abel unwillingly learned another language, French, only because of teaching methods in some classes of Samuel Hearn Middle School. It was full immersion in the language environment, not only in classes that were conducted in French. During their breaks, students were forbidden to switch to English or any other language too. Other children who studied according to the regular curriculum constantly made fun of them and called them French. Abel did not study very well. He was a quiet, calm, even introverted child who preferred to spend time not with textbooks, but in front of the TV. He also did not like the piano lessons that his mother enrolled him in to take. Even the pop music attracted him much more than classical music. He also liked marijuana, which he tried for the first time at the age of 11. A poor area, a modest life, dubious prospects for the future. All this put pressure on the very young Abel and thus made him run away from reality. But reality had one huge advantage that was worth coming back for. It was music. When The Weeknd became famous, only the lazy did not say that a strong Michael Jackson's influence could be sensed in his music and behavior on the stage. Abel never denied this. Moreover, he said that it was Jackson's music that influenced his desire to sing. People forget, We Are the World is for Ethiopia. At home, if it wasn't Ethiopian music, it was Michael. He was our icon. The song Dirty Diana inspired him to try to write his own lyrics for the first time. Abel grew up in the golden era of R&B, which also strongly influenced his taste in future style. The music of Timbaland, Missy Elliott, the Neptunes was everywhere. Very soon, hip-hop was added to his favorite genres. This was influenced by the first 50 Cent album, which was released when Abel was 11 years old. During this same period, he fell in love with the music of Jimi Hendrix, Led Zeppelin, and Pink Floyd. Many years later, Roger Waters, a former member of Pink Floyd, will say that he means more to music than Drake and The Weeknd combined. All because in the summer of 2022, Waters played 2 concerts in Toronto at once, and The Weeknd's performance was cancelled due to lack of light. However, everyone wrote about The Weeknd, and almost no one wrote about Waters. But let's go back to Abel's childhood. Tesfaye was expelled from the first school after one incident, which now he can't even remember. The young man had to transfer to another one. At that time, he was already 17, all his friends were in an old school, so at the new school he spent only 6 months. Parents could not give Abel the brother he always dreamed of, so he found him on his own. On the first day in his new school, he noticed a boy in a bright pink polo shirt and started talking to him. His name was Lamar Taylor, and the first conversation quickly turned into a strong friendship, then into a creative tandem, and even later, into a business partnership that exists to this day. Lamar is currently a creative producer for The Weeknd's XO label. Though it was still a long way to recognition and even more so to business, the dream of leaving his neighborhood and achieving something greater only grew stronger. Finally, after 6 months of studying in a new school, Abel decided to make a bold move. He dropped out of school and convinced Lamar to do the same. As you can see, it didn't take long to persuade a friend. This fateful decision came over The Weeknd. That's how he got his future nickname. One evening, he and Lamar arrived at Tesfaye's house in a van, and Abel went inside to take his mattress. The whole action was accompanied by a stern look from his mother, who did not say a word, but it was clear that she was in despair. According to Abel, she did not quarrel, but her look seemed to ask, "Am I a bad mother?" Of course, she wasn't. Abel always said that all the best in him was passed down from his mother, but at that moment he decided to do his own thing, without taking into account the opinion of such a close person. If the video didn't end there, then he made the right choice after all. So, the friends drop out and rent a one-bedroom apartment in Parkdale, Toronto. This area was soon to be demolished in order to rebuild it and turn it into a business center, and at the time, the only people who lived there were those who could not afford to rent normal housing: drug addicts, students, and drug-addicted students. Their apartment cost $850 a month, but even that kind of money they almost never had. During the day, friends wandered around the district, stole food from supermarkets, spent the night in cheap bars or at parties at friends' houses. And of course, they dreamed of how one day everything would change. Every earned penny was immediately spent on alcohol and something stronger. They used everything that could be bought on the street. As you understand, these were substances for every taste. Apparently, because of the constant parties, they were kicked out of the apartment very soon, so the lack of money was added to the lack of a roof over their heads. This was not a problem for Abel. His innate charisma, seasoned with false words about love, attracted women, and he could travel from one bed to another for months. If he was realizing that he had nowhere to sleep that day, Abel would remember the girls he met at parties and spent the night with them. They believed in the sincerity of his words and intentions, and at some point he had 3 girls who thought that they were dating Abel and did not know about each other. Despite the chaotic way of life, Abel already knew for sure that he would be engaged in music and took confident steps in this direction. In 2008, he took the nickname Ken Kane, and together with his friend Jesse Ray, created a hip-hop band called Bullies and Nerds. On one hand, they behaved like hooligans, but looked like their typical victims. Of course, they didn't have money for professional recording, so they performed for free at parties, freestyled in kitchens, and wandered around the streets at night dreaming of success and trying not to get noticed by the police. Abel spent most of this time at the bottom. If he wasn't high, he had a hangover. He did not communicate with his mother for 2 years. There was always a lack of money, so he had to get a job at an American Apparel t-shirt store. In a few months, his colleagues would be listening to music from a mysterious newbie who they would find on MySpace without even suspecting that they were his colleagues. During this period, soberness was synonymous with unhappiness, so he avoided it by all means. The only thing that brought him pleasure was music. At first, Abel tried to prove himself as a songwriter. He wrote a large number of demos about his crazy everyday life, which he tried to sell to local artists, but no one wanted to sing his songs. It just wasn't conventional like R&B was at the time, The Weeknd explained. And then I tried to be a little bit more experimental to see if people wanted a new sound, and nothing was connecting, so I said, "F*** it, let me just sing it myself." And only one person helped turn his drafts into full-fledged music with a recognizable style. His name was Jeremy Rose, and he was a young musician who not only saw something in Abel, but immediately wanted to work with him. They quickly became close, started meeting every day, and recorded several demos together, which would later be included in The Weeknd's first release. In his interview with Vice, Rose said that at first he liked working with Abel, but as time went on, there were more and more creative differences between the musicians, and the issue of money was coming up more and more often. Abel offered Jeremy to become his producer, but he refused because he understood that he'd have to work for free. After receiving the demos, Abel refined them, wandering from one familiar musician to another. And in the fall of 2010, his friend Lamar released the first 3 songs on MySpace and YouTube. They hardly expected success. The songs were accompanied by black and white photos of half-naked women. Tesfai's face was nowhere to be seen, but the songs were already signed under the pseudonym of The Weeknd. One letter was removed to avoid accusations of plagiarism, as a band with the same name already existed in Ontario. To their surprise, all the songs were successful. 2 weeks later, one of the songs, What You Need, appeared on the popular music review site Pitchfork as Best New Track. Despite the initial success, almost no one knew who The Weeknd was. That all changed after Drake posted those songs on his label's blog, making The Weeknd tens, if not hundreds of times more famous. His popularity grew. People started writing and talking about him. But The Weeknd remained anonymous, which only increased interest. Everyone thought it was part of his image, but later Abel admitted why he refused to give interviews. Me not finishing school. In my head, I still have this insecurity when I'm talking to someone educated. I don't want them looking at me like, this retard. No disrespect. An important reason why the artist remained in the shadows for a long time was that he was afraid that people would start judging him not by his work, but by his appearance. So it worked in my favor, and then it became a gimmick. He said, no one else was doing it at the time, so it was a breath of fresh air. And then the mythology and the mystique of it ended up becoming as interesting as the music. I tried to ride that wave as much as I could. In the internet age, it's impossible, but I got a few years in. But time passed, and maintaining anonymity became more and more difficult. Having received the first portion of attention and popularity, Abel grabbed this chance and took an important step. He opened his own label, which was named XO. Among the founders were The Weeknd himself, his manager Wasim Sleiby, Amir Ismailian, as well as the old Lamar Taylor, whom they dropped out of school with a few years ago. His own label, opened at the very beginning of his career, spoke of great ambitions, but The Weeknd's debut mixtape House of Balloons, which was released on March 21, 2011, spoke even better about them. During the next 9 months, 2 more mixtapes, Thursday and Echoes of Silence, were released. Initially, the releases were distributed for free because the artist did not have the money to clean the samples. The Weeknd subsequently received a lucrative contract with Republic Records, after which all mixtapes were officially re-released under the title Trilogy, with the same original producer, Jeremy Rose, listed as the author of 3 songs. It must be said that in 2011, the R&B genre was not going through the best of times. It clearly lagged behind hip-hop in popularity, but such a necessary and unexpected appearance of The Weeknd changed the situation. He shook up the industry, making other artists write faster. For example, in the same year, Timberlake also released 2 releases at once, and Beyoncé returned with an album after a 3-year break. Abel himself perfectly understood his role and spoke about it without excessive modesty. It definitely changed the culture. No one can do a trilogy again without thanking The Weeknd. I'm not going to say any names, but just listen to the radio. Every song is House of Balloons 2.0. From a musical point of view, these releases could be described in 2 words: dark R&B. Although this, of course, did not fully reveal his music. If you don't analyze each of the 30 tracks separately, you can highlight several common themes. The first one is a very autobiographical, though fictional, story about a lonely person who suffers from addiction and unsuccessfully seeks salvation in love, which he does not deserve. This is haunting, depressing, disturbing, but at the same time tender and sincere music which deserves the status of one of the best debuts in history. No wonder The Weeknd is called the idol of idols, and you will soon understand why. Unlike many artists, The Weeknd's lyrical hero on these albums is definitely not a good guy. His hero cheats, regularly uses substances, is rude and vulgar, but at the same time he suffers from a guilty conscience and reflects on his own actions. The entire trilogy is a mixture of dreams, hallucinations, and a depressing reality, in the middle of which there's The Weeknd singing about it. All this couldn't have a happy ending, so in the end he gets what he deserves: a broken heart and a broken house of balloons. The Trilogy debuted at number 4 on the US Billboard 200 and sold 86,000 copies in its first week. In America, the album became platinum. In Canada, twice platinum. Not only ordinary listeners, but also such stars as Drake became fans of The Weeknd's music. The latter closely followed the development of the young musician's career and then invited The Weeknd to work together on his Take Care. Apparently, The Weeknd felt grateful that Drake helped him in the beginning and in return not only helped with the album, but literally gifted him several of his songs. His first solo performance took place at the Mod Club in Toronto. Despite the fact that the concert was announced only 10 days before the start, all tickets sold out in an hour and a half. At the same time, this performance was a moment of coming out of the anonymous period, as well as preparation for a big performance in front of thousands of spectators at the OVO Festival, which was organized by Drake's label every year. Despite the fact that creative differences and The Weeknd's reluctance to sign a contract with Drake's label partially spoiled their relationship, at that time both made the most of this collaboration. The Weeknd significantly expanded his audience, and the album Take Care, on which they worked together, became one of Drake's most successful works. His first major performance took place in 2012 at the legendary Coachella Festival, but The Weeknd remained unsatisfied. I got off stage and thought I did pretty good, then I watched the tape and it was a nightmare. I saw all the comments and I wanted to kill myself. That guy on stage is not a star. That's not a legend. The main thing was that The Weeknd did not just remain dissatisfied, but began to take dance lessons and did not go on stage without many hours of rehearsals. Soon his performances turned into a show, and The Weeknd looked on stage as if he was born for it. In fact, his first performance wasn't as bad as he thought it was. It looked like this. The Weeknd toured European music festivals with Trilogy. He was in Portugal, Spain, England. The tour turned out to be as successful as possible. The career was on the rise, and everyone was waiting for a continuation in the form of a new album which was about to come out. The first official album, Kissland, was releasing the following year, in 2013. Don't let the name mislead you. This is not a romantic album at all, but on the contrary, an even more disturbing album, inspired by the horror films of Cronenberg, Carpenter, and Ridley Scott. The Weeknd called Kissland a place where he has never been and knows nothing about, but this place exists and it represents fear. Here, a person becomes a different version of himself, acts in a way that he would never act, breaks away from reality, and turns into something else. Interestingly, there is no guest on the album other than Drake. Instead of looking for star collaborations, The Weeknd isolated himself from everyone, buried himself in his own world, and continued to explore the themes of addiction, loneliness, and sexual obsession. And although this album was commercially more successful than Trilogy, taking second place on the Billboard 200, the reviews were mixed. They wrote that conceptually the new album was too similar to the previous release and more attention was paid to storytelling than to the music itself. Later, The Weeknd also admitted that he wasn't too happy with this album. There were several explanations for this. First, he made 3 releases in 1 year, helped Drake a lot with the album, and was exhausted when he wrote Kissland. Still, it was a solid full-length debut that sold 270,000 copies and started The Weeknd's ascent to the mainstream. What do you think of the artist's first album? Share your favorite songs with us in the comments. Unlike many artists who rose from the bottom, Abel was not going to play the king of the underground and understood that he needed pop songs. You could not become a star without them, so it was necessary to move in this direction. Abel wrote 2 soundtracks for the movie Hunger Games, Devil May Cry, and Elastic Heart, which was created together with Sia and Diplo. Besides working on the soundtrack, The Weeknd joined Justin Timberlake's tour, opening the stage for the headliner. This is how he promoted his album, got used to giant stages, but most importantly, brought his music to people who were not yet part of his audience. An important turning point in Weeknd's career can be considered joint work with Ariana Grande, who also worked with the Republic Records label. In 2014, Monty Lipman, the director of the label, showed Abel a half-finished song, Love Me Harder, and asked if he wanted to participate in it. Abel liked the song, but found it too typical, so he rewrote the lyrics in his own style, which made the track darker, and that's how The Weeknd's first big hit was created with 800 million views to date. Shortly thereafter, The Weeknd's first solo mini-tour of North America, dubbed the King of the Fall Tour, began. In support of it, the singer released 2 songs, King of the Fall and Often, and it became clear to fans that a new album was almost ready. Abel also wrote the song Earned It, which became the soundtrack to the movie 50 Shades of Grey. He was nominated for an Oscar and a Grammy for this work. The Weeknd, who always wrote honest songs and shared his innermost thoughts with listeners, hated to put his private life on display. Imagine his surprise when the paparazzi started following his every move for the first time. In 2015, Abel was seen in the company of 18-year-old model Bella Hadid, and their potential couple became the subject of discussions and rumors. There was even a created account on the internet which monitored any communication between Bella and Abel's pages, likes, subscriptions, or comments. And what do you think? Is the profession of paparazzi necessary in today's world, or should it die out? And public people still deserve privacy? Write your opinion in the comments. Soon it turned out that the couple was really dating. It is important to note this moment in his biography because it was the first time when the romantic side of the performer's life became public. Their relationship began shortly before the release of The Weeknd's second studio album, Beauty Behind the Madness, and Abel wanted Bella on the cover. Nothing came out of it, but they began to communicate, and soon their friendship turned into a relationship. In 2015, they were often seen together, and at the end of the year, Bella starred in the music video for The Weeknd's single, In the Night. Soon, Bella gave an interview in which she officially confirmed that she was dating Abel. They were seen more and more often. They looked even happier. But soon they broke up. After that, they got back together again, then broke up again. And so until 2009. When they tried to restore the relationship once again, they realized that nothing would come of it and put an end to it. In public, anyway. As it was said already, Abel never liked to show his private life, but in 2015, he became so popular that it was almost impossible to hide anything. Then, in this regard, everything only got worse. All along, he was credited with romances with Angelina Jolie, model Giovanna Ventura, singer Chantel Jeffries, and Rosalia. But for the most part, these were just rumors. Abel had public romantic relationships only with Bella and Selena Gomez. We'll talk about her later, but for now, let's get back to his creativity. On August 28, 2015, The Weeknd released his second studio album, Beauty Behind the Madness. This record was somewhat similar to the previous one, but had a more mainstream sound, and the mass listener knows The Weeknd precisely because of the hits from this album. It should be understood that at the beginning of 2015, The Weeknd was already one of the biggest hitmakers. Immediately, 3 of his songs entered the top 20, including the soundtrack to the film and 2 singles from the new album, The Hills and Can't Feel My Face. The album went double platinum in America and sold more than 1.5 million copies. That year, it became the most popular album in terms of the number of streams on all platforms and was nominated for a Grammy as the Best Album of the Year. This release took The Weeknd to a whole new level, beginning his first of a series of major transformations in terms of appearance, music, and lyrics. The Weeknd before was a marginal poet who met the dawn in someone else's bed with a girl he was seeing for the first time. He felt for a long time that it was time to change something, but not only in life, but also in the approach to creating music. This album was the result of abandoning old habits and lifestyle, and it also moved The Weeknd from the smoky room to the center of pop culture. It is necessary to understand that the artist's transformation is not just a rejection of the old image and its change. In fact, this is a logical process experienced by almost all big stars, a rise from the basement to the stratosphere. During this period of his life, Abel was lucky enough to meet the legendary producer Quincy Jones, who worked with Michael Jackson. They met at a bar where 82-year-old Quincy sometimes performed. Abel couldn't help smiling, realizing that such a person was not just sitting next to him, but knew his name. Working in the studio with his friends, Abel often thought about how Jones and Michael Jackson pushed each other to greatness. When Jones met Michael, they were both at the top, but working together not only took them to a new level, but also changed music forever. The Weeknd speaks about this person with admiration.
He pulled up to one of my club shows, and when I got off stage, he was waiting on the side, and I was so excited to meet him.
In short, The Weeknd made a powerful album and killed 2 birds with 1 stone. He rehabilitated his unconfident debut and proved that he really is a great artist. The next important stage of Weeknd's creativity was the album Starboy, the peak of his popularity. Here he collaborated with real giants at the stage: Lana Del Rey, Future, Kendrick Lamar, and even Daft Punk. The Weeknd has been a fan of the latter all his life, but never dreamed of collaborating. One day, Abel met Guy Manuel, one of the founders of the Daft Punk band, at a club in Los Angeles, and it turned out that they followed his work and knew who The Weeknd was. Soon they went to Paris, where the band's studio was located, and in 4 days they recorded 2 absolute masterpieces, I Feel It Coming and the main song for the new album, Starboy. It took 2 days per song. What makes this collaboration even more legendary is the fact that only 2 artists in the world have had the honor of being produced by Daft Punk, The Weeknd and Kanye West. Starboy is something more than just a hit album. In 2016, rap experienced an unprecedented renaissance. It sounded from every corner, but Abel did not follow the popular sound. He made his own. The Weeknd wanted to change again, although only a year had passed since the last transformation. He became an icon, but he understood that without constant growth and experimentation, he would not be able to maintain his success. He started with the most important thing. He went to the barbershop and finally got rid of his palm hairstyle, which was called Tsunami, and which had been with him for the past 5 years. The no-budget indie film that used to be called The Weeknd has turned into an expensive blockbuster. Starboy became commercially successful, received good reviews, but there were enough critics. Some believed that the new image was too shiny, too polished, and not everyone liked this inclination towards pop music. The album's success was an undeniable fact, but at the same time, it could be said that its influence on the genre of R&B and music in general was minimal. Influenced by the legendary Daft Punk, The Weeknd was seduced by the electronic sound, and he obviously liked it. Still, it's a good, strong album that marks the end of Abel McConnen's 6-year evolution from homeless to the world's biggest pop star. Perhaps you won't be surprised if we say that this transformation hasn't been the last either. Between Starboy and the next big album, rightly considered by many to be a magnum opus, there was another release preceded by another relationship. During 2017, Abel dated Selena Gomez, but the relationship broke up after 10 months. They were often seen together. Selena was traveling with The Weeknd during his European tour, where they were seen in Italian museums and restaurants. They were together on the Met Gala red carpet, at the Coachella Festival, and in Selena's Instagram photos. And although a lot was written about their relationship and there was even more gossip, it's not known why the couple broke up. Perhaps the reason was that they jumped into this relationship having only recently broken up with their previous partners. Perhaps it was a matter of excessive workload of both artists. After breaking up, both briefly returned to their exes. Later, both broke up with them either. And although nothing came out of this relationship, The Weeknd got the necessary melancholy mood and inspiration to write a mini album called My Dear Melancholy. There's a sense that this release sounds and looks like it should have come out after 3 mixtapes and before the first album. Electronic music stars worked on the music. Skrillex, Nicholas Jar, and the legendary Guy Manuel from the Daft Punk band. Another person who worked on the sound was the genius of the music industry, Frank Dukes. Genius is not just a loud word, it best describes the capabilities of this person. Maybe he wrote the melodies for your favorite songs. The Weeknd's next big album was released on February 19, 2020, and was called After Hours. The title refers to the film with the same name by Martin Scorsese, and the total number of references to the world of cinema on the album cannot even be counted. You need to understand that 2020 was not the best time to release albums. The pandemic has ruined the plans of many artists, but The Weeknd had to release this album to prove his next transformation in history. You can find love, fear, friends, enemies, violence, dancing, sex, demons, angels, solitude, and togetherness in the night of After Hours. So why did he once again decide to change his style? First, his popularity reached such a scale that any statement, interview, or ambiguous song lyric was interpreted by hundreds of different versions. He was tired of the fact that some people listening to songs associate their lyrics not with a fictional hero but with Abel Tesfaye in particular. Of course, much of the written stuff directly concerned the author, but this did not mean that he wrote only about himself. The main task of this album was to separate The Weeknd from Abel Tesfaye. The hyperbolized, even caricatured language of cinema was perfectly suited to this task. This album is fear and loathing in pop music. The Weeknd deftly balances his beloved 80s aesthetic with his ambitions to be a mainstream hitmaker. It seemed that The Weeknd pleased everyone with this album. Looking for hits? Here you are. There are several of them. The numbers speak for themselves. Do you like rap? Snow Child will suit you. Despite the fact that he sings on it, the song is a 100% rap track about rising from the bottom, endless name-dropping, and puns. Maybe you like the aesthetics of the 80s and 90s. A good half of the album is at your disposal. Visually, especially in the music videos, The Weeknd looks absolutely insane on this album. His character inspires fear and loathing, but at the same time, it is impossible to look away from him. To be like him, no, but to watch how he gets insane, absolutely yes. Before this album, The Weeknd's career included innovative mixtapes, experimental albums, and art house records like Kissland. And he also had super hits. The only thing missing was an album in which it would all be at once, but after the release of After Hours, that changed. The album sold 500,000 copies in just 1 week. The first single, Heartless, stayed in the charts for 2 years, and the second, Blinding Lights, has almost 4 billion streams on Spotify. Despite apparent commercial success, none of the new songs were nominated for a Grammy. This surprised fans and infuriated The Weeknd himself, after which he accused the award of corruption and promised to completely ignore it in the future. Billions of streams, millions of fans and followers and social networks are good, but the greatest recognition is probably the opportunity to perform at the main sports event of the year, the Super Bowl Final. That opportunity arose in 2021, and The Weeknd was the first Canadian artist to headline the Super Bowl Final. He spent $7 million of his own money on this performance without earning a cent, and put on an unforgettable 14-minute performance, finally proving his status as the new king of pop music. If you missed it, we highly recommend watching the entire performance because it was something truly fantastic. There were the greatest slightly censored hits, a huge choir, live guitars, violins, a golden maze, dozens of singers' clones in strange masks and crimson tailcoats, and a firework at the end. It was a real celebration arranged by The Weeknd. Well, it's hard to forget about the incredible number of memes that flooded the internet right after his speech. No successful career of an artist is complete without high-profile failures. Sometimes this does not even apply to music. A real failure with a huge number of scandals was The Weeknd's recent attempt to join the creation of a series called Idol. This is an HBO project about a young pop star who starts an affair with a nightclub director. The young star is played by Lily Rose Depp. The director is The Weeknd. Moreover, he was an executive producer, a screenwriter, and the author of music. The series got a lot of bad publicity before it even came out, although perhaps it should, given its subject matter. When director Amy Seimetz filmed almost all the material, it turned out that the project would begin to be reworked according to the new vision of its creators. The Weeknd himself was apparently unhappy that the finished material showed too much of a female point of view. Amy was replaced by Sam Levinson, the creator of Euphoria. The cast was partially changed. Later, the series was released and completely failed. This happened despite a good and high-quality advertising campaign, good visuals, and a really cool soundtrack. The reviews were mostly overwhelming, but the ratings were low. Everything was criticized. The Weeknd's acting, inappropriate candid scenes, weak script. The least complaints were about the music, but that did not save the series, and it was closed after the first season. It's unlikely that The Weeknd would give up after this, especially since he answered all those critics that he expected such a reaction, which meant he did everything right. The Weeknd is a fan of cinema, as evidenced by his endless references to cinema in music videos and lyrics, as well as his own attempts to film and act. Want to know his favorite movies? Just take a close look at The Weeknd's music videos. There are Casino, Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas, Obsession, Blade Runner, Joker, Mask, and dozens of others among his favorites. Despite the bitter experience associated with Idol, very soon the artist will have a chance to rehabilitate. It is known that The Weeknd is a co-author and producer of Edward Schultz's new film. There are no details yet, but it is known that Abel, Jenna Ortega, and Barry Keoghan will star. But for what he definitely does not need to apologize, it's his last album to date. Many artists use a simple rule: if it works and brings money, just don't touch it and continue in the same spirit. Artists do not change their style for years. They're afraid of experiments, negative reviews, and unsubscribes. Obviously, they become great when they make music for their own pleasure without looking back at the requests of the audience. The Weeknd's latest album, Dawn FM, is a great example of this approach. Having received 0 nominations for the previous release, the artist did not prove to the critics that they were wrong, but on the contrary, delved even more into the aesthetics of the 80s and 90s and continued his party, which was attended only by friends and friends of friends. The album was released on January 7th, 2022, and even from the cover, it was clear that this was another new version of The Weeknd. The concept of Dawn FM deserves special attention. In short, it is literally the radio one hears when he follows the white light in the tunnel between life and death. The Weeknd tried not to make it look like a cheap trick with the help of one of his favorite movie actors, Jim Carrey. Carrey hosts a radio show and plays the role of a mysterious character tasked with accompanying a listener to the afterlife. And although Jim appeared on only 3 tracks, he fit perfectly into the concept with its existential thoughts on life and death. For sure, Jim Carrey is a person who inspires confidence. Would you not agree to follow him, even to the afterlife?
Don't you dare touch that dial.
There is a feeling that this is an album for musicians, maybe even for one musician, The Weeknd. After all, he gave listeners so much music. Now he did something for himself. Judging by the reviews and the number of streams, the album remained incomprehensible to most of the audience. Most of the songs did not reach the mark of 100 million streams. Furthermore, for the first time in 7 years, no song entered the Billboard 200 chart, even though the album features Lil Wayne and Tyler, the Creator. On the other hand, this album is only part of a new trilogy that started with After Hours, and it is not yet known when it will end. There is a suspicion that the third album will be called Afterlife. Don't miss this canonical event. And in order not to miss our videos about other stars of the music industry, please press the bell button and subscribe to the channel. We'd be very grateful to you. So, in a recent interview, Abel said that he is almost ready to close the project, The Weeknd, in order to release music under a new name. He has already removed the pseudonym from almost all social networks, replacing it with his real name, so the album he is currently working on will likely be the last under the pseudonym The Weeknd. I'm going through a cathartic path right now. It's getting to a place and a time where I'm getting ready to close the Weeknd chapter. I'll still make music, maybe as Abel, maybe as The Weeknd, but I still want to kill The Weeknd, and I will. Eventually, I'm definitely trying to shed that skin and be reborn. The Weeknd's success story looks like it has been written by a Hollywood screenwriter, but it's his real life. From an almost homeless teenager who didn't have money for a sandwich, to the new king of pop music and one of the most successful artists today with a fortune of 100 million. Apparently, the secret of his success lies not only in talent and ambition, but also in the ability, and most importantly, the desire, to constantly experiment and change. He became famous by glorifying unattractive, even gloomy, and often repulsive episodes of human life, but no one before him did it so attractively and beautifully. The Weeknd is a phenomenon that did not just appear but created himself. He suffered, cried, and finally sang. He saw the real bottom and he didn't like it, so he did everything to get out of there and be in his place, on the throne where there is a place for a real king. We really hope you enjoyed this story. You can find even more interesting biographies of extraordinary and great people by clicking on the video that appeared on your screen. But don't forget to like this video before that. Look for your favorite personalities, enjoy, and most importantly, stay with us because more and better will come next. It was the Enco Stories channel. Thank you for watching and see you soon.